The Blue Jackets had maybe the best possible trade deadline they could have had, and that's what we're going to talk about on today's special live edition of Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to a live edition of Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. You can also find us on SiriusXM. I also have to let you know before we get started, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, and right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So we're talking about the trade deadline. I was going to talk a little bit about the game last night because I decided not to record before the trade deadline because I knew that things would happen, and I am glad that I didn't, because now we get to talk about that game, which was a lot of fun. We get to talk about the trade deadline, which was honestly A+ for me. We'll get into a little bit more detail later on, but it's been a pretty good 24 hours to be a Blue Jackets fan, I think. So we'll start off with the Peeke trade. We'll move on to the Roslovic trade. We'll talk about the Malcolm Subban trade. And then after that, if there's any questions or anything like that, I'll try to keep my eye on the comments and answer them kind of as and when. But please don't be offended if I miss your comment. I am only one person and I can only do so many things at one time. But let's start off with the Andrew Peeke trade, which for my money was the biggest thing that they did at the trade deadline. Because they managed to get rid of Andrew Peeke. They didn't retain any salary. They didn't get any kind of extended contract back. They didn't get a roster player back. And they didn't get any kind of prospect to kind of help out with the logjam that they already have. So Peeke is off the books completely. Jacob Zboril, the player they got back in return, his contract ends this summer. Can't imagine the Blue Jackets will extend him. He's probably going to go straight to Cleveland and help out there, which is good, I think, but does kind of create a little bit more of a problem in Cleveland in terms of like the defensive logjam that they have down there. But there's a spot open now in Columbus for a seventh defenseman. So I'm wondering, does David Jiricek come back up? Does Nick Blankenburg, I think, is still injured, but he might be an option. Does Jake Christiansen get a look through the end of the season? You know, it opens up some possibilities. It gives the Blue Jackets more flexibility. And they get out from under that contract that I think was not the worst contract that they could have signed, but I do remember looking at it and thinking, man, 3 years is a long time for Andrew Peeke, especially based on the season that he's had so far. He played in, 22 of the 60 or so games that the Blue Jackets have played so far this year, and the Blue Jackets had won 5 of them. And now I'm not saying that they lost all of the games because of Andrew Peeke, but that's not a great track record. So he gets to go to Boston, gets to be a depth defenseman there, and maybe gets some playoff experience. You know, maybe finds a home there that he could never really find in Columbus. So, like, I'm thrilled by the Peeke trade. I know Dina Weinheimer, who's hanging out on the stream right now, she loved Peeke. She thought he was great in Cleveland. Didn't really ever get a chance in Columbus, but it was a necessary move. I completely agree. Ben Pezot, sorry if I've mispronounced your name. It was necessary. It should help Jiricek get more time next year. If the Blue Jackets are going to make the playoffs next year, it's needed. Completely agree. Jiricek is the guy that I would call up, I think. Actually, would I? Maybe not. If they were going to play him, I would call Jiricek up yesterday. Jiricek should not be the 7th defenseman, but I do wonder if someone like Blankenburg gets called up to be that 7th defenseman that gets to kind of rotate in based on who is getting benched for being a Harlem Globetrotter. I don't know. But to me, that was the best move of the deadline for the Blue Jackets by far. I know everyone loved the Emil Bemstrom for Nylander trade, which is not technically a deadline trade, but I'm going to count it anyway. That was also a great trade. Look at what Nylander is doing. He's going to come back down to earth immediately, or eventually, not immediately. But it's great. It's been fun. I've missed having fun watching this team, quite frankly. And I have had fun watching this team. Penguins game aside, for the last couple of weeks, this team has been fun to watch. They've looked good. Everyone has played well. The goaltending has been solid. The kids have been good. Like, the vibes are good right now. And the good vibes have continued into the trade deadline with the Peeke trade. The Roslovic trade, I know, is a tough one because he was the hometown kid, the Columbus kid. I think the first Columbus kid to play for the Blue Jackets. I cannot remember if he or Corrali played first, but one of the earliest Columbus kids to play in Columbus. So, like, they'll miss him. He's had a really great couple of weeks, which I think probably contributed to his being traded. The Blue Jackets were not going to keep him. They didn't have room for him. They've retained salary, but, like, it is what it is, it's a business. It's tough. I think the team will probably miss him. I think he'll miss Columbus. The Rangers are doing something. I don't know how much I trust them to get far in the playoffs, especially if they run into a team like Carolina, which apparently has decided that the cap doesn't count anymore, kind of like Vegas. But the Rangers is a pretty good home for Roslovic. And again, I think getting a fourth-round pick that turns into a third-round pick if the Rangers make the Cup final. I don't think they will, but hey, you never know, So those are the two kind of bigger trades. And then there was the minor trade, the Malcolm Subban trade, which was interesting and surprised me at first. And then I saw a lot of people talking about, oh, there's definitely a goalie move coming. Why would they pick up Malcolm Subban? Because now they have too many goalies. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that most AHL teams carry 3 goalies. And it's kind of unusual that Cleveland doesn't because for call-up reasons, exactly like what happened last week or earlier this week, which was Elvis was out with bumps and bruises. They called up Jet Greaves, and the Monsters were like, well, we only have one goalie now, so I guess we'll start Pavel Chyan and then sign some guy to a PTO and then release him afterwards. So this gives Jet Greaves a little bit more stability in Cleveland. It helps the goalie depth out because you don't necessarily have to call up Jet Greaves now. If you need an extra goalie, he can stay in Cleveland and, continue to cook there. And it means he doesn't have to play every single game because Pavel Chyan, I think, is going to be a decent AHL goalie when he is ready. He's still cooking. He's still figuring things out. But the Subban trade was a really nice little piece of business in supporting the Monsters, who are currently at the top of the North Division. I think they're like 5th or 6th in the AHL standings right now. I'm just pulling up the standings to find out. Yep, they are 5th in the entire AHL right now. They've got 72 points. Currently, they've got a bye to the second round of the playoffs, where they will likely face the winner of Senators and the Marlies, if it stands right now, I believe. Don't quote me on that. They're gonna do more in the postseason than the Blue Jackets will. So I like that the team is kind of setting them up for success in getting them help. And in no way does this mean that Malcolm Subban is going to be a replacement for Merzlikins or Tarasov, which I don't understand. Maybe it's just that people don't pay as much attention to the AHL as me. Like, I don't know why the average person would, but and admittedly, this is my fault for looking at the comments on Facebook. But every single comment was like, "Oh, bye Elvis. Elvis is gone. Why would we replace Elvis with Malcolm Subban?" Like, there was a lot of comments being thrown around that I know better than to read, and yet there they were. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. And then in a minute, we are going to talk a little bit about what the Blue Jackets are going to look like now that Roslovic is gone, Peeke is gone, and they called up Trey Fix-Polanski, which I'm very excited about. So we'll talk about him in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you guys about Factor, because I don't know about you, but I'm kind of a gremlin person. I eat a lot of like instant ramen and cereal and just kind of make it up as I go along. And I don't have to do that anymore with Factor. They've got delicious, ready-to-eat meals. It's fresh. It's never frozen. It is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. They've got low-calorie options, high-protein options, keto options. They've got a bunch of add-ons to help you stay fueled up and feeling good all day long. They've got breakfast, snack bars, like treats. It's so good. It is the perfect solution if you're looking for fast premium food options with no cooking required. It's flexible for your schedule. You can get as much or as little as you need by choosing your meals every week, and you can pause or reschedule your deliveries any single time. It's less expensive than takeout, and it's nutritious and delicious. So head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50. Use code LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off. That's code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Before we talk a little bit about Trey Fix-Polanski, there's a question in the chat that I just saw, or a comment in the chat, that I wanted to address first, from Dan Gerg. I wonder if there was no interest in Elvis. I believe the Jackets want to move him. I don't necessarily think they want to move him. I think they were probably listening. That contract is not a trade deadline contract for trading. If he moves, I suspect it'll be in the off season if it does happen. I wonder if he seems happier over the past couple of weeks. I wonder how much of him being frustrated and not wanting to be there was, again, because of Jarmo Kekalainen, who is, no longer there, obviously, and he's been playing well. I don't pretend to know what's going on behind closed doors, but it feels like since Kekalainen is gone, the vibe for the goaltending specifically have been a lot better. So I wonder how much of that was coaching, how much of that was GMing. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they move Elvis in the offseason, but his stats right now, I think, are okay, maybe not the kind of stats that you want a $5 million goalie to have, but they're not terrible. They are extremely on a team this bad. They are extremely acceptable, if you ask me. I'm just pulling up what their stats are right now. You go to goalies. Games played, get stats. Okay, so Elvis Merzlikins has played 34. He started 34 games. He's got a record of 12, 13, and 7. He's got a .904 save percentage and a .321 goals against average. Daniil Tarasov is sitting on an .894 and a 3.48 goals against average. He's at 6, 8, and 2 on the season. Elvis statistically is the better goalie. I still think those stats aren't necessarily $5 million goalie worth, but you can see, especially over the past maybe month or so, I think you can see a clear improvement in the goaltending. Like if you're an everydayer, you'll know I spent the first kind of couple of months of the season being like, wow, I'm not worried about the goalies anymore. And then I started worrying about the goalies. The last month or so, I haven't been worried about the goalies for like a month. It's been great. They've had bad games, here and there, but for the most part, I've been really, really pleased with Merzlikins and Tarasov as a duo now that they're actually, trading starts. I'm sure Elvis would probably like to get a couple more starts than he's currently getting, but right now I'm pretty happy with the goalie situation, and I think the trade situation with Elvis, I think, has probably cooled down a little bit. I think they'll probably listen in the offseason, but we'll see kind of where that goes, because right now I think don't mess with a good thing. This team doesn't need Vezina level goaltending to win, or it shouldn't. So if they can get kind of these kind of performances out of Elvis regularly, like that feels like a win to me. got a comment or a question about the return for Peeke. I will answer that in just a second here. I want to touch on Treyfix Wolanski finally getting his call up. Because this is a guy that, and Dina, who is still in the chat, I know that you will agree with me on this. Treyfix Wolanski is a guy that has more than deserved an extended NHL look right now. He should be here for the rest of the season. And like, that sucks for Cleveland to miss their leading scorer. He's third in the AHL in scoring right now. But quite frankly, I think he's deserved an extended NHL look. I think he's been, he was only okay in his most recent call-up, but generally speaking, I've really liked Treyfix Wolanski at the NHL level. I think he deserves at least some middle six time. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you slot him in on that top spot, because I don't think you want to break up the Sillinger, Nylander, the Sillinger, Nylander, Texier line. I don't think you want to break that up. I don't think they will break the Russian line up. So who goes where Roslovic is? Fantilli's out, Johnson's out, Laine's out. Do you put Treyfix Wolanski there and see what happens? I hope so, because I think that'll be really fun. In terms of Abdina's also confirmed Blankenberg is out injured. So who do you put as that seventh defenseman? I don't necessarily want either Jiricek or Christensen to be a seventh defenseman. I think if you're going to call one of those guys up, then you need to play one of them. You know, like, don't call either of those guys up and just let them sit, because I think both of them deserve better than that. If you had to sit one of them, like, I guess I would much rather have Christensen sitting than Jiricek at this point. I think Jiricek needs to play, and that's kind of well established. That's why they sent him back down, because he was just sitting around in Columbus. So I feel pretty good about how this team looks post deadline. It's going to be interesting. I'm excited to see what the roster shapes up as in Nashville, because I don't think you should mess with a good thing. Obviously, losing Roslovic, there's a hole on that top line, but honestly, for my money, just slot Treyfix Wolanski in there and see how it goes. You can always move him if it's not working. That's kind of all I had in terms of like my thoughts on this. I've got a handful of questions. I want to go to one on Twitter first before I lose it. Here it is. From Cameron Myers at CMyers98 on Twitter. Do you think we'll be want to move Elvis and Provorov before the next deadline? I'm mildly surprised that Provorov wasn't moved this deadline, but I think he's definitely a case to be flipped either in the offseason or at the next deadline, depending on what the Blue Jackets are doing, whether they're a playoff team. He's not in the plans for the future, and he again is kind of standing in the way of like a Denton Matejchuk, who is going to be graduating from the WHL probably in the next month or so, depending on how far Moose Jaw gets in the playoffs. So if they can find space for a guy like Matejchuk, then Provorov is the obvious option to go. Severson's got term. I think Boquist has really come into his own this season. I think Bean has really come into his own this season. Gabranson's not going anywhere. Werenski's not going anywhere. So, like, Provorov is kind of the odd man out, and I'm not super upset about that. I think he had a really good start to the season and has really dropped off since then. So, Elvis, I've talked about a little bit. Again, I think he's not a deadline move. He's a summer move if it does happen, but I'm not so sure that it does anymore. I guess, never say never. It depends on what the new GM wants to do with him, who the new GM is, but we'll see, I suppose. How do I feel about the return for Peeke, considering he wasn't a lineup regular? I feel fantastic about the return for Peeke. The Monsters get another defenseman, a guy that's on an expiring contract. We don't have to worry about him needing space next year. I guess he's technically a veteran, even though he's like 27, which makes me feel really old if I'm like, yeah, he's 27, a veteran. He's been decent to good for Providence this season. And the Blue Jackets also got a 3rd round pick on top of that. Like, it's for 2027, which I don't think is a real year yet, but getting a pick and getting that entire contract out from under you, like, that's such a win. When I thought it was Peeke for Zboril 1-for-1, I was over the moon. I was like, yeah, this is a B+ trade. Seeing the full return, adding that 3rd round pick, I'm like, yeah, this is an A to A+ trade for the Blue Jackets. So great work. John Davidson off. Like he's doing okay as the interim GM, which is not what I was expecting necessarily. Other questions. Here we go. From friend of the show. How do I rate the Blue Jackets deadline moves? This is from Anna Shea Walker, friend of the show. I rate them between an A and a B. I think. Would I have liked to get a little bit of a higher draft pick for Jack Roslovic? Sure, but I'm not like mad about the return at all. And it might turn into a third if the Rangers make the Stanley Cup final. So like I'm you know what, A minus to a solid B plus for the trade deadline. They moved out the contract that needed to be moved out. They got assets back. And they didn't like need to do anything terrible. So 2 thumbs up. Now that it's past deadline, the season is nothing again. What would you most like them to do with the time left? What players do you want them to try? What lines do you want them to mess around with? Or is there anything else that you want to get silly with it? What do I want to do? I would, like I said, I would love to see Trey Fix-Polanski in the top 6. I would love to see David Jiricek back in the NHL, especially, you know, if they want to sit Bean for a couple of games or Boquist for a couple of games, I don't know. I think Jiricek deserves, again, another look. I think that his season has kind of been derailed a little bit. It's not by no means the end of the world, and I think there was a lot of kind of like hand-wringing and fear-mongering earlier in the season when he got sent down and was mad about it, but I would love to see him get another look. Like I said, Trey Fix-Polanski in the top 6. I think he's earned that. He's one of my favorite players down in Cleveland and has been for several seasons now. And that's partially because like I really like that archetype of player of like small guy that works harder than anyone else and doesn't have any fear. And he's finding success as a 7th round pick who I believe he's officially 5'8", but having stood next to him at the AHL All-Star game, I can confirm he is not 5'8". So I will not blow up his spot as to how tall he actually is, but as someone who is 5'8", Trey Fix-Polanski is definitely not 5'8". But yeah, give him top 6 minutes. I think he's deserved it. I think he's earned it. Like the season's done. The season's lost. What's gonna hurt now? You know? Getting weird with it. This is all from Anna Shea as well. In my totally imagined future where Yama wasn't fired before the deadline, what do I think he might have done? How weird would that have gone? Oh God. I should have read that question before and had to think about it. But I don't think he moves Peeke. I think he probably moves. He probably still moves Roslovic. I think he honestly, Kekalainen was so hit or miss with trades. I feel like his trades were either incredible or terrible, and there wasn't really any in between. So, like, do I think he could have snuck a 1st round pick out of like combining Roslovic and Olivier, maybe, or Roslovic and Peeke, or Roslovic and Provorov, or anything like that? Yes, probably. In the same way that he kind of magicked a 1st round pick away from LA for Gavrikov and Korpisalo last year. So I think it would have been weirder moves, but I don't necessarily think it would have been better moves. And the jury was really out on whether it would be a great move or a not great move. My gut instinct is that he would continue to try and kind of tick the rebuild along in a way that's not cheating, but I think it probably would have been a little bit more, let's try and get some assets and pieces instead of getting out from underneath the contracts that he gave to them. JT Most Life. Yeah, I think JT Most Life. I think it was a great trade deadline. They talked a lot about how they weren't going to do anything big, and I did worry that they were going to keep hold of everyone, except, you know, maybe 1 or 2 depth moves to bolster the monsters. But I feel great about how the trade deadline went for the Blue Jackets. Hi to Locked on Sharks. Sorry about your entire team leaving. I'm also sad about the Tomas Hertl trade and probably will be sad for a little while. Vegas can't keep getting away with this, etc. makes sense that one of the teams that I like did good things and one of the teams I like did less good things. I'm not used to it being this way around, if I'm being brutally honest. I fully expected the Sharks to have a better trade deadline than the Blue Jackets, and I'm not sure that they did necessarily. That's kind of all I have. I don't think I have any more questions unless they're on Twitter. Just a comment from Fenrir Varga. JD said he was thinking of sending Fantilli and KJ to the Monsters for their playoff run. That's a big mistake. Both of those guys and Jiricek should be getting big minutes in the NHL. I hope Brindley signs after his playoffs are over. I wouldn't have hated sending either of those guys down, especially because so here's the thing. The AHL season runs longer than the NHL season, even without playoffs. So I believe the Monsters don't finish their season until like the third week of April, if I'm not mistaken, whereas the Blue Jackets are done by like April 8th. So you let them finish out the regular season, you send them to the AHL, and then hopefully they have a nice long playoff run. Obviously, both of those guys are injured, so it's not going to happen, but I wouldn't have hated either of those guys going down. I do agree they should be playing big minutes in the NHL. Jiricek should also be getting big minutes in the NHL. In terms of Brindley signing after his playoffs are over, I would be okay with it, but I also wouldn't be mad if he decides to stay at Michigan for another year. I very rarely am in favor of, I very rarely think that a player spending another year in juniors is a bad idea, especially a guy like Brindley. I think I think leaving a guy like Fantilli at Michigan, I think would have been a mistake because I don't know that he had anything else to learn at that level. I think Brindley at Michigan, I think he can learn more by being the guy there. He's already kind of the guy now, but I'm not going to be mad if he needs another year to develop in Michigan and then he makes the jump to the NHL next season, as opposed to what will likely happen, which is that if he signs after these playoffs in a couple of months or in a month or so, like 3 weeks, I think. God, how is the season nearly over already? What I can see happening is he gets his 8 games at the end of this season and then probably spends most of next season in the AHL. It's kind of swings and roundabouts, I'm not mad about either of these options. I don't know which one is more likely, but I could see either of them happening. So I'm not out here like banging the drum like, yes, make Brindley a Blue Jacket immediately, even though I would really enjoy like a Brindley, Fantilli, Johnson line. I think that would be extremely fun. It's not something that I'm necessarily like pounding at the door to have immediately, especially with Johnson and Fantilli out injured at the minute. Like, I kind of feel like, yeah, shut Fantilli down for the season. I know that he wants to come back and play games at the end of the season, but I would be fine if they shut him down for the rest of the year. Quite frankly, he's going to come back and play like 4 games at the end of the year. And I don't really see a point. Just get the rehab in and then start working to next season, because I think the expectations next season are going to be that the Blue Jackets are maybe not a playoff team, but challenge for the playoffs. One last thing, I completely agree with Dino Weinheimer. The deadline for the Jackets feels appropriate for where the team is. Now they have room for all of the upcoming RFAs as well, which is something I hadn't considered. Johnson, Chinikov, Marchenko, and Texier all need new contracts this summer. They just freed up like $6.5 million of deadline of cap space to do that. There's other money coming off the books. They might try and clear something later on down the line, but now they have room to play with all of these contracts that need to be signed. So it's gonna be an interesting offseason, I think. That's kind of all I've got for today's episode, for today's live stream. Thank you for coming to hang out. I think I saw like 14 or 15 of you here at one time, which is awesome. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making us your first listen, despite the fact that it's 5:30 p.m. Don't worry about it. I'll be back on Monday to talk about the rest of March, to talk about the Blue Jackets. I think the Blue Jackets play tomorrow. I haven't looked at the schedule yet, but whenever the Blue Jackets play next, I'll talk about that. I'll break down that game. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Don't forget to email me proof of you being subscribed to the YouTube channel, and you'll be entered into a draw to win 2 tickets to the April 1st game against the Colorado Avalanche at Nationwide. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.